Greetings and welcome to Professor Geochronicler's School of Vanguard, where I will be teaching you all the different rules of Vanguard, how to play certain clans, different combos, and all different kinds of effects and cards we'll be getting. For our first lesson, we will be looking at the basics of Vanguard itself. Now, for those who are new to the game, let me give you guys a breakdown. Vanguard is basically a simple card game where there are all monsters. There are no spell and trap cards to be used in this game. For those who are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic, you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But here, it's all monsters, and you have to use cards for defense and attack. That's the way the game works. However, each card is broken down into its own grade and attack power. Each card has its own characteristics. You have its grade, attack power, shield value in the case of some cards, what clan it's from, and what nations or what flag it's come from. Each card basically has, with each game of Vanguard, you must make sure that you must start with your starting Vanguard. In this case, we have Glime here, who is your starting Vanguard. In this example, Glime is your 6K starter that has a simple ability. When placed upon, you basically draw one card from your deck. But many of you are asking, but Professor Gear Chronicler, how exactly do you start the game? Very good question, students. And that is what we'll be explaining today. This will be our very first lesson. Now, I actually have a constructed deck on hand to basically explain to you how exactly the game works. Your deck simply must consist of simply three components as of June 2017. For premium, it consists of a G zone, a set of gift markers, there's no limit, your main deck, and your starting Vanguard. In my case, Bark Gull. But we'll be going into premium in another lesson. For this lesson, we will be only talking about the standard format of Vanguard. And it just so happens I happen to have a standard Royal Paladin deck on hand at the moment. This is only broken down into three steps. Your gift markers, like I mentioned before, starting Vanguard, and your main deck itself. To start the game, you'll want to arrange your deck in a certain way. Your deck is placed over here in the deck zone. This is where you'll be putting your deck. Behind here is known as the drop zone. This is where you discard cards for guarding, for either using in defense, or if you're discarding for effects. The main field you're looking at is your main field. The main circle right here is your Vanguard circle. It's your Vanguard circle. This is where your main unit goes. These 5 unit circles right here, and I'll be using blank cards to demonstrate this, are your 5 rear guard circles. In a game of Vanguard, you can play a maximum of 6 units actually. 1 Vanguard, 5 rear guards. These are the units you will be playing with the whole game. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you start the game with your gift markers. They go in a specific area right here, which is known as probably your marker zone, or for those who played in the G era, the G zone. Returning back to the main field for a second, I will be explaining how the effects work. But first, we need to go over how you start the game. To do this, you simply take your deck and you draw up to 5 cards. Like so. Make sure you draw exactly 5 cards. So let's pretend that this is your starting hand, for example. In this case, we have Soul Saver Dragon, Marin, Isolde, and 2 Elaines. Now, when you're putting cards back, make sure you want to put cards that you don't want right away. In this case, we will be keeping Marin and Soul Saver in our hand and placing these 3 onto the bottom of the deck. This is the way the new Mulligan rules work. In the old days, we would have to place our cards on top of the deck, shuffle, and then redraw. But the new rules don't allow that. In this case, we just put our 3 cards on the bottom and simply redraw. In this case, we've gotten a second Marin, Flogel, and Blaster Blade, specifically the anime version. Once you got your starting hand, you then proceed to start shuffling your deck. This is the motion you'll probably want to go through when shuffling your deck. Once your deck is shuffled, you place it in front of your opponent, and your opponent cuts your deck like this. Once your deck is all shuffled, and you have your gift markers all placed, it is time to start the game. Let's say that I'm going first. You start each turn by drawing 1 card from the top of your deck. You do this every turn. In this case, the card we drew is Knight Squire Allen. You then proceed to what's known as the ride phase. In this case, you'll want to take a card from your hand and place it on top of your Vanguard. In this case, we can either choose to ride either Marin or Allen. But in this case, we'll start with Little Sage Marin. This is called a ride. The unit below it is placed underneath your Vanguard, and it becomes what's known as the Soul Stack, or Soul for short. Now, this is where things get interesting. With the new starter, we have an effect that we can use right away. So since I rode on top of Grime, or Glime, depends what you want to call him, you basically draw another card from your deck. In this case, we drew another Blaster Blade. Now, if we were going second, we would probably want to call another unit behind it. But if we're going first, it's better to set up your game early hand. In this case, we call Allen to rear guard. So, normally that would be the end of the turn right there. But if we were going second, we have an advantage. You have the attack of the first turn. Now, when you're attacking, you basically want to turn your cards sideways, indicating an attack. But here's the thing. When you're using units in the back row, the 3 units that are in the back row here can basically support your units in the front row, both your Vanguard and your 2 front row rear guards. Alright. In this case, you'll want to say that you're boosting Marin with Allen. In this case, however, Allen's power. Now, here's the thing. When you're supporting with units from the back row, the power from the back row unit is added to the power of your Vanguard. Now, this is going to require a bit of math skills for this one. But in this case, our power is 16,000. In the event our opponent doesn't guard or says they do not guard. So, in this case, you'll want to look at the top card of your deck. This is called a drive check. And in this case, the card we drove check is a Pongal. And since we did not drive check a trigger, the card we revealed goes to our hand and our opponent takes 1 damage. Now, the effect also works the opposite way. When your opponent is attacked, you'll want to say, you'll either want to guard it or not. In this case, we do not guard. So, we reveal the check, and it looks like we got ourselves a trigger. In this case, the bringer of good luck, Epona. Now, each trigger has its own special ability, which I'll go into further detail in a second. But in the event, anyway, the card revealed is placed in another zone called the trigger zone. In this case, Eponus power, the power of the trigger is added to our Vanguard. With the new triggers, all triggers give a 10th base power boost of 10,000 power, 5,000 in case of the older triggers. In this case, the 10,000 power is added to Marin, basically making her a 18k defender for the entire turn. The card we revealed then moves into the damage zone. Now this is where you have to be extremely careful. In the event you get 6 damage, game over. The person who gets 6 damage loses. So, in the event you want to defend your Vanguard, and don't want to take another attack, there is another way to go. Most cards in your hand have what's called a shield value. Excuse me for the glare. The shield value is placed on the side of the card. Most units have the shield value, but in case of grade 3s, we do not. So in this case, we will want to guard with Flogel. Now Flogel's 15k defense will be added to Marin's already 18,000 defense. Hence, this will make the total shield value of 33,000, which will mean your opponent will need 2 triggers to pass. But since they're on grade 2, they cannot do that. So, after we're finished guarding, the card moves straight to the drop zone. This is basically your graveyard, for those who play Yu-Gi-Oh! So, your opponent's turn ends. So then we move on to our turn, but our units are rested. No problem. We do what's called a stand. We stand our units first, then we draw another card. Alright. And that's pretty much how a turn goes. Each turn you'll want to ride your Vanguard to 1 grade higher, and then as the game progresses, you'll want to call as many units as you can. But in some cases, there are a lot of effects that can actually help you in the game. For example, remember Pongal from last turn? Well, now we can actually use Pongal. But to do that, we actually need a rear guard first. So, let's call Marin out into the field first. And then, we call Pongal to the field. Now, at this very moment, 2 simultaneous effects happen. These are known as auto abilities. Basically, you get to take a look. It's an effect that happens automatically. The automatics are the green skills, but there are also activate skills, which are blue effects. In the case of these 2, we want to activate Marin's skill first, but we need something to use. Well, we have our damage zone can also help with card effects. We do what's basically called a counter blast. This is basically by turning over a card in our damage zone to pay for effects. In Marin's case, we only need 1. So, Marin's case, we draw 1 card from the deck, and he gets an extra 3,000 power until end of turn. But then, Pongal's skill activates. So we basically take the top card of our deck and place it into the soul stack. This is known as a soul charge. In Pongal's case, if this was a trigger, Pongal would get an extra 5,000 power. But in this case, we have now 3 soul to work with for the turn. So you're probably thinking you don't want to call more rear guards. Well, our Vanguard in this case, Blaster Blade, has a different effect of his own. It is stated in the card effects that if we have 4 or more rear guards, Blaster Blade gets a critical. So, let's zoom out for a minute and see that effect in action. So, we want to call Blaster Blade, and he gets another critical. But, it turns out, we have another Pongal that we drew earlier. So his skill activates, and it's not a trigger this time. So this pumps up our soul to 4. So, if you have multiple Pongals in hand, this could really pump up your soul charge early on. And this is what I was referring to earlier. We can play a maximum of 6 units. But there is another clan. other effect that allows us to play an extra rear guard, but we'll get into that in another video. For now, we have 5 rear guards and our Vanguard. This in all total makes 6 units altogether. I will be explaining how some other effects will be working in other videos. But so in any case, both Pongles are basically the AK boosters on their own. But Marin, however, is 11K on her own simply due to the fact that Marin used his special ability earlier. So this means that this column is attacking for 19,000 power, and this is 18,000. Columns are 18,000, but Blaster Blade has an extra critical here. So in this case, we'll want to start with our rear guard attack first. This is important if you have 3 front row rear guards to work with. But if you have only these 2, you'll want to start with your Vanguard. Alright, in the event you get a trigger, the power can go to a standing rear guard. So in this case, our attack is 18,000 power, and our opponent decides to block it. So now, we then move to Alan, supporting Blaster Blade, and this is another 18,000 power. In this case, our opponent doesn't guard. So we try check another trigger card, and it's another Soul Saver. So basically, normally it would do 1 damage, but in this case your opponent does 2. So then we move on to Pongal, and Marin is supported. Normally this would be 18,000. Be 16,000, but because of Marin's special ability, this is a 19k attacker. And this is pretty much how the game will go. You basically continue all the way up to grade 3, and you will keep attacking multiple times a turn. By guarding, you must make sure that your opponent gets to 6 damage before you do. But there are other cards that you can use later on. But I'll be explaining how Premium works in a separate video. But for right now, we're sticking with Standard. So, in this case, we have 3 Soul Saver Dragons in our hand, and we can't guard. So our first attack will take the damage, and it turns out we have Elaine. Now, heal triggers actually have a shield value of 20,000, which is extremely helpful. So basically, Blaster Blade gets 10,000 power. Attacks again, we do not guard. This time, we get Epona. And we're at 3 damage, but Blaster Blade is actually up to 30,000 in power. So the attack fails, and it's our turn to attack. So in this case, we ride Soul Saver Dragon, but here's where things get interesting. Remember these cards I was showing you earlier? Well, oops, wrong card. These are known as imaginary gifts. This is the new mechanic we're getting in Vanguard nowadays. In the case of our Royal Paladins, we have the Force mechanic. So basically, the Force mechanic can be placed on any one of these rear guards, but in this case, we'll give the power to Marin. So as long as a unit is on this is where the marker is, that unit gets 10,000 power every turn, or so long as that unit is in place. Nice. But in the case of our Soul Saver Dragon, because of the early soul charge we have, we're now up to 5 soul. So Soul Saver Dragon is your finisher. But here's the thing. You can actually stack force markers. Say you keep riding to grade 3, and you keep stacking markers on multiple units. This can make for some extremely powerful plays later in the game. If your opponent is unable to guard these attacks, you basically end up winning the match altogether. And that's pretty much, and that is the basic game of Vanguard. It may sound complicated at first, but with more experience, you will end up learning more and more. You will also come up with better strategies, and also learn different effects. But there were also other effects that I mentioned. In the case of Standard, we'll take care of that right now. What I have here Here is another clan that we have in Vanguard right now. This is called the Nova Grappler clan. Now this clan has a different ability of its own. When you ride a grade 3, you get another gift. But hold it, this is a different marker. These are called Excel markers. And what this basically does, it allows you to create another circle. You can basically create multiple circles in front of your Vanguard, creating multiple attacks. And in the case of our boomerang thrower here, a card placed here gets 10,000 power and basically creates a second attack. So if you had like two more rear guards here, so for example, you'd basically end up with 4 attacks in a row. Oh, but there's also another trigger that we also need to explain. This is called a front trigger. And when revealed, you don't choose one rear guard, you don't choose one unit or Vanguard. You actually give the power to all 4 of your rear guards. All 4 of your units. Basically, you're attacking for a lot of power that turn. These also have shield values of 15,000 power like most triggers. There are also other units you can also work with. When it comes to defense, there are also certain cards you work with. In this case, we have what's called a Sentinel, or Perfect Guard as most people call it. The way you basically do is, when this card is placed on the field, on the Guardian Circle, you take a card from your hand and you move it straight to your drop zone. This basically prevents the opponent from doing a further attack, no matter how strong it is. This is also true for another clan, Protect, which basically uses the marker itself as a defensive trigger. But there's actually a specific card that we'll be working with. This is called a Draw Trigger PG. Now, draw triggers basically allow you to draw an extra card. Plain and simple. But because this is a PG, in the case of Ari Salt here, oops, bump the camera, you'll basically drop one card from your hand, and you drop your opponent, and you basically prevent the attack from going through. I'll be explaining. Right. These are some of the many features that I'll be explaining throughout my series. And hopefully, I hope to inspire either you to either get into the game, teach a friend, or learn a thing or two, or have a fun game. I will be explaining some of the other card effects like G units, G guardians, lock, and all the keywords in later videos. Until then, class dismissed.